Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Emmaus Project. This week I'm joined by Lesleigh Bauer. Lesleigh is an ice hockey player, a solicitor, and an all-round leader in her own right. We cover a lot of ground in the hour. We talk about her passion for social justice, the importance of intergenerational community, her time as one of the top leaders of the church in Western Australia, her work now in law and child protection. Lesleigh has some great advice for leading where you are and how to use your gifting to find your inspiration. As always, please click the subscribe button to stay up to date with the Emmaus Project. Cool. Lesleigh, welcome. It's good to have you on the Emmaus Project, joining us from WA. How are you going?
Good, thank you, Dan. Very good. 30 degrees here and sunny, so no complaints.
30 degrees. It's like I'm in Bundaberg and normally it's still sort of tropical kind of time. But last week, it was still 30 degrees kind of last week. And then just yesterday, we dropped to like 10 overnight and 24 degrees. So I think everyone's going to get sick in the next couple of days, but it's good. That's pretty warm for Perth, like for this time of year.
Yeah, it is warm. So hence everyone hit the beach today. Our social distancing restrictions have been lifted. So we're allowed to have groups of up to 10 people together. So certainly the Perthites took advantage of that today, at least at South Beach, where I was too. So happy days.
Well, 10, yeah, that's pretty good. I don't think we're only like 2 people still in Queensland, but yeah, they're a bit, I don't know, stricter for some reason. Now, I got to start off with, like, I like to share like a bit of a funny anecdote or something like that I have in connection with this sort of person. And the one that I want,
well, just for the record, I've got one about you.
No, this is a good thing. This is a good thing. So what I want people to know is that you're basically famous. Because you're like an elite athlete. Because just a couple of months ago, I was scrolling on KO Sports, and I stumbled across you playing. You're a recording of you playing sport on KO Sports. So, do you want to maybe tell people what that sport is and how you got into it?
Yes. I was as shocked as you were to find my team on there. We call ourselves semi-professionals. Certainly not professionals, but that sport is ice hockey.
Yep.
Has a massive following in Australia.
Yeah.
Not really.
Well, hey, it's on KO.
It is on KO. It must be true, right?
Yeah.
No, I've been playing that for over 20 years now. Yep. And you would think I would be better than I am, but hey, here we are.
So, like, it's an unusual sport for people to get into. And it's funny because even now, I was saying to my boys that, I'm talking to Lesleigh today, doing a recording for the show. And they're like, "Oh, who's Lesleigh?" And I said, "Who we used to go and watch play ice hockey." And they're like, "Oh, yeah." So that's their connection with you is.
Oh, that's cool. I'm happy with that.
That's good. Ice hockey. Yeah, I think it's probably pretty cool. But how do you get into something like pretty unique, I guess, like you said, in the Australian psyche?
Yeah. So the story is that when I was in year 5, that was around the time the Mighty Ducks movies came out.
Yes.
And,
classic.
Cult following, there's nothing better. And I hear that they're making a remake. So just,
okay.
Looking forward to that.
Knox just watched the first one within the last month or so.
Classic.
Yeah, loved it.
So that happened, and there was a boy at school who was bragging about the fact that he was playing roller hockey, and rollerblades were cool then as well. They're not so cool today. Like, people honk the horn at me when I'm out rollerblading, and they yell profanities as well, but that's another story. So just went down to the local rec centre and I joined his team, I think. And so that was inline hockey, and I played that for about the first 15 years or so.
Yeah.
And then inline kind of died a natural death here in Perth, and we transitioned to the dark side, which is ice hockey. And so I'm still learning how to skate, to be honest. But yeah, don't mind having a bit of a skate at the rink and hitting a few people. It's a
Yes.
great stress relief.
Yeah. Yes. No. Yeah. You do seem to spend a bit of time in the penalty box, Leslie.
None of that is intentional, and I'm very conscious of being a good Christian on the rink as well. So, like, I don't get involved in the verbal sparring, but I think the issue is that I get lazy with skating, and I need to stop the person from scoring a goal, so I'll just hit them instead.
Yeah.
And,
Well, look, I imagine stopping's probably one of the hardest things is skating. Like I have zero ability, probably like negative ability. I'm not a very good person with balance sports at all. And I imagine like stopping to be the hardest kind of thing. So
yeah,
I imagine I'd just like be plowing into people all the time.
sometimes that's advantageous. That's a tactic in its own right.
Yeah. Well, look, and you can just blame it on your lack of ability. It works so good. But so you in Perth, grew up in Perth,
Yep.
always. Yep. And so that's kind of unique in some respects to sort of have you growing up in the one city and then uni in the city and then your professional life now in that city. It's probably not so unique for Perth because Perth's kind of like that. I don't know, there is something about Perth. There were a couple of West Australians that got offended with my, West WA is kind of its own country sort of thing.
Oh, it's all true.
It is true.
Um,
And they
we love
desire it
being
to
by
be true
ourselves. Yeah.
as well. Even with this COVID stuff, there was the, we should secede from the rest of Australia.
Yeah, let us keep our mining tax.
Let's keep your mining tax. Yeah, that would be handy. But you grew up there. You grew up going to church and that kind of thing. So what's been your sort of experience growing up in the church and sort of growing, then going to uni and work life and that kind of thing?
Yeah. I know it. I've come to know that it is unusual to have been in the same spot my whole life. I will say that I spent a while in Japan during uni.
Okay.
So,
I do know, yeah, you've got a very soft spot for Japan.
I do.
Yeah.
But apart from that, yeah, grew up in Perth. Mum is actually from Burma, so she was born and raised there. Modern day Myanmar is the name that they use. So she came to Perth when she was about 18.
Yep.
The result of that is that she's a legitimate tiger mum.
Yep. Yep.
As you know.
Yep. Okay.
And,
I can, see that. Yeah.
So everything that comes with that, we benefited from, She's strict, she's organized, we played musical instruments, we had to take our studies seriously, but, it all turned out relatively well.
Yeah.
Dad is from Kalgoorlie, so a Caucasian Australian male, and, all that means.
Almost like the polar opposite of mum, though. Like
personality-wise as well.
Personality, that's like it's the yin and yang kind of
totally,
balancing powers within that relationship. But mum and dad have always been. Were they always pretty active in church and that kind of thing?
They were, yes. At the time you don't know that that's unusual, but it just becomes the way of being. Mum's there at church to play the piano, dad's there to teach Sabbath school, and then before you know it, you're there doing the same things and leading out as well. So our church growing up was a smallish church at Mount Lawley in Western Australia. So we had probably about 40 regular members. Which is not massive for a city church. That is, it's not massive,
and it's in a city. Yeah,
in a city. Yeah, fantastic location. I'm going to buy it back one day. It's since been sold, but I'm going for that building. But the other unique thing about it was that we only had about 3 or 4 kids there, and the result was that us 4 kids were raised by this aging church community. And they took great joy in, they'd sit behind us in church and help mum calm us down when we were going a bit crazy. And it was just a big family environment, and everything down to, Sabbath school teachers who were these very old ladies now that I think about it, but here they were, taking us out for fish and chips and having us for sleepovers and stuff like that in primary Sabbath school, which is probably a bit unusual in today's day and age, but it meant good things for us, and I'm really grateful for that now.
Well, I think it's unusual in the sense that like that's kind of, in our church at the moment, that we're having like a lot of discussion around like growing young and that kind of thing. And that really typifies growing young, like what you're describing, like that even though there was this big age difference, that people invested the time in you guys and just loved you guys. And like that's such a cool, I'm so glad that that's what it was like, because I had no idea. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was great. The only downside was that when we went to big church events, none of us kids actually went to Adventist schools. So when we went to big church events like camp, we didn't know anyone.
Yeah.
Always be, saving seats for each other. And oh my goodness, are you going to junior primary? Can you save me a seat? Because I don't know anyone else. So we're a bit weird, but it worked.
Well, it's kind of like you almost had like a regional, even though you were in a city, it's sort of like a regional church experience.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that church, when did they merged and became North Perth sort of church, and which is for context for everybody, which is where we met. I was the associate pastor there for a couple of years, and you were like, your whole family were elders at that church when I was
no conflicts of interest whatsoever
when I was there, and Mum was head elder, and like we'll sort of come back to that at some point. But so what sort of stage was that kind of merge?
Yeah, now that I think about it, and also as being someone who's worked in in the conference, closing churches is not something that we like to do. We hold on for dear life, and we fight tooth and nail to keep even really small churches open, which is a good thing. It comes from a good place. But in the case of Mount Lawley, we discerned that it wasn't growing. And another church just down the road, another inner city church, Perth Church, determined the same thing. Beautiful location, but again, a small congregation that was finding it hard to grow and change. And so what they actually did was agree to close both churches and merge to make a new church, which is about 20 years old now.
Okay.
It's ethnically diverse, it's intergenerational, and I think it's the best decision we ever made.
Yeah, and that's there's this funny saying like about WA, and I know my wife experienced it a lot when she moved from working in Queensland Health and then New South Wales Health, and then coming to WA and working in the health there. It's called like wait a while.
Oh yeah.
And so she felt like, and she worked in big hospitals, so like the PA in Queensland and then John Hunter in New South Wales. And so to then come to Perth, like she was like, man, they are like 10 years backwards, 10 years behind everywhere else. And I think it was sort of catching up because everything was getting nationalized and national standards and that sort of thing while she was there. But for me, like, WA, still has that sort of maybe traditionalist kind of mentality. So for them, the leadership of those two churches to actually be humble enough and progressive enough to go, hey, no, this is what we should sort of do. Like that's actually like a really forward-thinking, progressive kind of thing to do.
It is. Now that I think back to it, I probably would have been about 12 years old at the time, and obviously wasn't sitting in board meetings and things like that at that time, but I remember it being a really smooth experience. And part of the conversation was my parents saying to me, well, we know as you kids get older that you've got certain needs in respect of church, and the congregation we've been in so far may not be able to meet your needs as you become teenagers and young adults. And so that's one of the reasons why we think it's a really good idea to take this step, even though it's a bit uncomfortable and, you know.
Love the family and
Yeah. We loved hanging out together. It was a happy church,
yeah,
as far as I can recall. So, a very significant thing. And I agree, there must have been lots of humility involved in those leaders making that decision at that time.
yeah.
Mm,
And yeah, because like it did have a significant impact because what's the attendance like at North Perth these days? Like 200-ish,
yeah.
250 something.
250 memberships, probably pushing three.
Yeah.
So
And
it was
so
exciting.
and it's like completely full, chockers. And so, you sort of, whether if they hadn't had that sort of progressive kind of vision, whether that would ever have happened, we sort of don't know. But that's kind of church. So I sort of want to separate maybe church and Jesus in some sort of respects. And I don't know that you can really separate them.
Mm.
Martin Luther is kind of has this saying where you can't say that you love God and you don't love the church because they're kind of connected, even you know in that way. But for your personal journey, I guess, were there any sort of significant times where you sort of really felt like, yeah, no, like I'm choosing to follow Jesus, kind of thing, or
Yeah. It's funny you should mention Jesus and church as being potentially separate things, because I remember attended a public primary school, and then in year 8 I went to a Baptist high school.
yeah,
And on the first day I arrived at the Baptist high school, a well-meaning year 8 student came up to me and said, "Oh, hi, I'm such and such. How you going?" I said, "Oh, great." And she said, "What religion are you?" And I was like, having come from a public primary school, I thought,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
maybe that's how these, Christian schools work. And I was like, "Oh, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist." And she goes, "You're in a cult."
Oh,
And
welcome.
that's news to me. I mean, so having to be in an environment where not everyone saw things the same way as me
Yeah,
made me have to develop words around my faith.
yeah.
Who
Okay.
was I? What did I stand for? What did I believe? And
Yeah,
how could I explain that in a way to other people, to other teenagers, so that they understood what I was on about?
yeah, sure.
So that was a fantastic test. And, I think I'm pleased that now at least that community who I was in have a more robust and probably correct understanding of who Adventists are and what we stand for.
Yeah.
Um, but around the same time, I was playing inline hockey, and I got onto the Australian team,
Oh wow.
which is
See,
not hard to do. There's like a small pool of people who play the sport. So,
look, look, you're on KO Sports, semi-pro.
yes.
I'm going to put in your bio, semi-professional athlete.
um, anyway, playing hockey. So obviously there's international competitions. And when I
Yeah.
was selected, I walked up to my coach, and who I didn't know, she was from Melbourne, quite an intimidating individual. And I said, "Hey, I'm Leslie. You've just selected me on the team. Thanks so much. But I can't play Saturdays. I just want you to know that up front." And I was like 13 years old. And I
Yeah.
look back now and I'm like, what? You know,
Yeah.
what an odd thing for a kid that age to do, but I did it.
Yeah.
And so very early on, I had to take a stand and be the kid who decided for themselves, when their parents were not around, that I was actually a Sabbath keeper and what that meant for me.
Mm.
So again, I'm grateful for that experience early on, because it becomes a part of your identity,
Yeah.
and you start to walk in that separate from your parents.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, um, Adventism as part of Christianity, there's some unique things which are particularly countercultural, like in our current environment. And I have this distinct memory of when I was working at the Mater Hospital in Brisbane. Just we were saving up money to get married before I went to college, and there was a lot of like young nurses and other theatre techs and stuff, and it sort of come up about going out some night, and I just said, "Oh no, I don't drink." and like they almost literally like fell over. You know, some of these nurses that were sort of same age as me, or maybe just like a year or two older, and they're just like, "What do you mean?" And the cool thing is man, like that's over 10 years ago now, which is like, you know, 15 years ago now. But the cool thing is that like things like that are actually becoming a lot more culturally normal in our society. But I sort of want to dig a little bit deeper with that, is because you've gone, okay, here's some sort of traditional aspects where I had to make decisions around whether I'm going to do that. But my question was like around Jesus.
Yeah,
So
totally.
where the person of Jesus, and you know, I think they're important decisions. But was there something, you know, like I was saying to you before, you know, for some people, there's not like this watershed moment. It's just like this slow drip kind of process of, well, no, I just know God, and I'm happy with that. Um, what have been some key? Have there been some key defining moments for you around the person of Jesus and that kind of thing?
Yeah, certainly for me, it's been that slower burn, that gradual accumulation of an understanding of who Jesus is. And I actually think back and going to in the Baptist environment, I remember thinking to myself, wow, these people talk about Jesus a lot. And for some reason that was new for me. And I'm a bit sad about that now, because I thought, you know, as Adventists, we spend a lot of time looking at other things which are also important, but they're not as important as who Jesus is and how he works in your life personally. So I think my understanding and relationship with Jesus grew probably in my mid-teens, when I was searching for more than just religion. And thinking to myself, this stuff has to affect me in a deeper way. And where it really connected for me was in a social justice sphere.
Well, do you want to talk about that a little bit? And I think like just sort of commenting on that a little bit is, historically as a church, we've been really good at telling people what they should do, and like they're good things, right, that you should do, and you'll have a better life if you do these things. But in doing that, we've sort of forgotten or lost a little bit that actually that it's people need God, and then the change comes, and Jesus, and then the change comes, rather than sort of changing to become like God, and then, you know, we sort of had it in the reverse order a little bit. But I definitely think we're realigning that as a church. Well, actually, we might just put a pin in the social justice stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think it'll come up a little bit later. Finish high school, you go and do law. Why law? Because I don't know that I've ever asked you, but I've asked your brother, and I remember just sort of being a bit...
Did he say because Lesleigh did it?
No, being a bit bemused by his response, because he said, well, that's what Dad did, and looked like a fine job, looked like it was a job. So I was like, okay, good to see that's where your passions are.
Typical.
Yeah, real Andrew response.
Yeah.
But
for me,
why was it a because that's the family business, or?
No, not at all. So I don't remember having any conversations with my dad with him saying you should become a lawyer. Like, that's just not how he rolls. He's so laid back.
No, I'm sure Andrew did
everything that I do, and he just revealed to me the other day that he's been coming and watching my ice hockey games for 20 years, and he can't even see the puck. So he's the most supportive guy ever. He's amazing. So we didn't have that conversation, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to be useful to other people in some way. And originally I thought, I'll be a doctor. That sounds stimulating. But then I got to upper high school and I was like, I really suck at maths and science, so better scratch that. But then around the same time, I was becoming aware of this notion of spiritual gifts, and you start saying, okay, how has God gifted me? And it was in humanities and writing, and I was passionate about certain causes and things like that. And taken together, that skill set fits a legal career. At least I thought it did, more than it did my medical career, which never took off. So I'm really happy with the decision, I have to say. When your gifts align with your vocation, there's the makings for good things to happen, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think like that's probably like some good advice for maybe people that are looking for trying to figure out what to do with their lives. Like, I think you sort of got to look at what your passions are, but also like where you've been gifted, and sort of maybe trying to find like where those two cross over to some extent.
Yeah, certainly.
Because like there's so there's so much of the our sort of culture is so Disneyfied and that kind of thing in some respects, like around like purpose and around career, and you can do whatever you want to do or be whatever you want to be, and it's just rubbish, like really. Like I was never going to be a professional athlete, or like it was
not
like
too late.
it's not too late. Like there's certain things that, or there's just you're just not dealt that hand of cards, like you're going to be given, and that's just life. Like some people are going to be struggle with the sciences or whatever, so they not going to do medicine, like because they'll be a terrible doctor. So that might be what they really want to do, and so you got to go, okay, well, I really want to, what is it about being a doctor that I really want? And maybe you can find that in somewhere else. But yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. So you graduate law, you work for the family business for a while. And so I think part of the social justice stuff probably came out with your native title kind of work. You seem to be pretty passionate about that kind of thing. So do you want to share a little bit about what you loved about that? Or
yeah, certainly. You're right. I am passionate about that, and that wasn't something that I planned. It kind of happened as a matter of course in working in my first firm, and we used to represent traditional owners who were making native title claims to prove, I guess, to the courts and to non-Aboriginal Australia that they had been custodians of land since forever and a day, since before Caucasian people were here. So I became quite passionate about that because for many reasons, and in spending time with my clients, who I really admired, because there's a lot of things stacked against people from remote communities. They don't have the same opportunities that city folk do. The rates of illness are so much higher. So many things. And in working with them, I thought, wow, these people are doing wonderful things to serve their community. They're trying their best. And to me, this concept of the least of these was something that kept playing in the back of my mind. Who are the least of these in my society? And for me, I always get on my high horse about this. I don't understand. Well, I do understand, but sometimes we fly to other countries searching for ways to help when there's so much need in our own backyard.
I think no, that's really cool, because I'd never I knew that was something that you did, and knew obviously that was something you really enjoyed doing, because I could just tell that you were passionate about the native title stuff, but having that spiritual connotation of it, I hadn't really didn't know that that's why, part of the reason why you're so passionate about it. But yeah, definitely I think we love to go and do mission somewhere else, because I think we can walk away at the end of the day in some respects. I think when we can we can go and do something and feel good about ourselves for a little bit, and then we can come home and it's a lot harder than, I think some of the hard things that Jesus said are around like loving your neighbor.
Mm.
It's that loving your neighbor is a lot harder because you live with your neighbor
That's right.
365 days a year.
That's right.
And rather than sort of just going on this little trip and coming home and then I go about whatever my business is. But yeah, I think, yeah, we definitely need to be more locally focused for sure.
Definitely. Yeah.
So you worked for, how long were you doing law for in your first stint?
Almost 5 years as a solicitor,
Yep.
and obviously worked for a uni and stuff like that. So we've been in the game for a little while.
In the game. And then, well, like, because what I'm getting to, like, you worked for the conference.
Yeah.
So you took, your career took a bit of a change in scenery. So from moving from the law offices in the city to working on stuff like native title and all that kind of thing, to then coming and working for the church. And not just working for the church, but you came and took, I guess, the second highest office. If it's not really hierarchical, but like kind of is, like in a way, in real terms, it's high. It's not on paper, but in reality, maybe we could say, in function, we'll call it function, hierarchical. Okay. To being the general secretary for WA conference. Now, like, it's pretty wild, like, for a few reasons, right? So one, you're not a pastor, and that's not a requirement, obviously, as we can see, but it's
check the constitution.
Yeah, it's very unusual. It might not be a requirement, but it's very, like, super, super unusual. You're female, so that's that's not there's no requirement or non-requirement. It makes it more unusual.
Yeah.
And thirdly, you're young. So, like, you're sort of ticking these three young, like, I don't know, minority boxes. Like, I don't really want to use social justice terms or whatever. To go and take on this position of leadership within the church. Yeah, how did that come about? And yeah, tell me a little bit about that experience.
Oh, where to start? I will start by saying that it was a very happy experience for me.
Yeah.
People have said to me since, "Oh, did something go wrong? Is that why you're no longer in the role?" And I have to correct them and say, no, it wasn't like that. I was treated really well.
Yeah.
People were very kind to me, and I enjoyed myself a lot. I was in the role for 2 and a bit years.
Yeah, okay.
And how it came about was that, and I'll get on a bit of a hobby horse here, but the way we elect leaders in the Adventist Church, it comes down to who on the nominating committee knows you and knows what your skill set is and knows what you're passionate about. And in my circumstance, we had a president who was formerly a youth director. Yeah. And we'd worked closely, Pastor Terry, really good guy. And I think it was his example for many years before I was in the role, and him having conversations with me and with others saying, hey, we need you in church leadership. And of course, those conversations weren't always, we need you in the general secretary role. It was, hey, Leslie, how are you serving? How can we support you? And after years of having served in different, volunteer roles around the conference, you show who you are.
Yeah, so I guess that's probably an important thing to say, is that, like, you weren't just, like, dropped into the general secretary role. Like, you'd been a youth leader in the church, you'd be elder in your local church, you'd sat on some committees, like, both in WA conference and probably nationally, like, by that sort of point as well. So it wasn't this sort of, oh, I've just been dropped at the
No.
upper echelons of of leadership. Like there was a strong foundation of leadership before that. Yeah.
And that was only because those people who were already at the leadership table had the presence of mind to invite me into leadership roles,
Yeah.
in my 20s.
Yeah.
If that hadn't happened, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to serve in that role.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and for me, I probably didn't appreciate it enough when I was at North Perth, like the diverse board in
Yeah.
sense of age, because like my churches afterwards, like I've been the youngest person by almost half, like half the age of the elders
Mm.
and that sort of thing, and it's a really challenging sort of place.
Mm.
But you go to be general secretary at the conference, so quite a big shift in from law to secretary, even though it's a lot of policy kind of work and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So similar in that kind of field. But one thing I wanted to ask you about is you moving into a leadership role. So I said you weren't a pastor, so you don't have a pastoral sort of background, and you're leading guys that have 10, 20, 30 years experience in church and in that kind of thing. How did you go with that?
You probably have to ask them, Dan, to be honest.
No, well, like what I know that you would have been aware of it. Like it'd be very, while there were some younger ministers and some female ministers in WA, it's still kind of like one of these things is not like the other kind of experience. So I guess, what were some of the things you did to lead from that position with those guys?
No matter what role you're performing, I think there generally is an uneasiness where the older people have been plying their trade for their whole career, and someone their child's age comes in and starts doing things and making decisions. That must be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I was known but unknown
like
as well.
But like, it's not, so like we said before, like, but you had like three things going against you in, if I was to put on my like pastor's hat kind of thing, I'd say, okay, you're young, you're not a pastor, and that, like, for some of those guys that have been there for maybe 30 years, having a female in that role of leadership could have been confronting on top of those things as well. So like it was a big challenge.
I have to say, the law industry is not too dissimilar in that the place I'd come from, I was often the only female in the room, having meetings with lots of men, some big personalities, the barristers and stuff we used to work with.
Some big egos.
Yeah, so you develop tactics for working with that.
Okay.
And I think, I don't know, I would bring different things to the table. Like a female perspective is inherently different to a male perspective.
Yeah,
and
sure.
What I found in the church work was I would state something in a meeting that I thought was as clear as day. And the men I was working with would say, "Oh, that's a great perspective." And I'm like, "Isn't it obvious?" And they're like, "No, we've never thought of that."
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for Pastor Steve Goods, who I worked closely with, the president of the conference, and Peter Dose, the CFO. Those guys never made me feel like I was saying something dumb.
Yeah.
They always made space for me to talk. Yeah.
Super blessed in that sense that you're probably going to find two of the most supportive guys like possible in those roles. That
they were amazing, and they always encouraged me. And afterwards I'd be like, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that," and then they say, "No, Leslie, you do need to speak up, and we're happy for you to do that. And they wouldn't just listen to what I had to say and then move on. They'd actually take it on board. And if it was worthwhile and helpful, they
Yeah.
would, do what I was recommending. And
Yeah.
I was just so grateful for it.
Yeah. So you mentioned like you had some strategies for dealing that kind of environment. So if we sort of focus it down a little bit, it could be, say we've got a young person on a local church board, and that kind of thing, or it could be in their own work environment. What were some of those strategies you had that they could sort of take on board?
Yeah. So in a meeting situation, a couple of things. Because I'm introverted by nature.
Yeah.
My
Same. Yeah.
my standard posture or position is that I listen to other people talk. I listen to the extroverted people talk, and I let them talk for a while. And I'll take what they say and try and process it in my mind before coming up with a response. So I wasn't the personality in the meeting going boom, 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 boom. I think we should do this, that, the other. I would listen, and then I'd give a coherent, succinct response, which had the potential to change the course of conversation.
Yeah, cool. That's interesting, actually, because I read an article not too long ago about introverts, and there's extroverts are kind of idealized in a lot of environments, like, and as leaders and those kind of things. And introversion is sort of seen not to be as good in leading and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But this article was sort of saying, well, actually, the deeper thinking of introversion, and that it is a benefit, and that strategy is really good, where you're sort of saying, absorb the sort of information and then use your introversion superpower to sort of hear what they're saying, and you can maybe guide
Definitely.
the conversation with where you want to go.
Definitely. And in addition to that, introverts are aware of who the other quiet people are in the room.
Yeah.
So I think a really important thing to do is to back up when they speak up. First of all, make sure they have an opportunity to speak up. So it may be intervening when all the extroverts are going at it and saying, actually, hey, I see Dan sitting over there. I'm just wondering what Dan has to say about this issue, and making space for them, inviting them into the conversation. But in addition, after they have spoken, if it's something you agree with, get behind them and say, I just want to affirm Dan for what he said. I agree with that wholeheartedly for these reasons. And in the same regard, I had to be really conscious about doing that for other women when they were in the room.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
So again, small tactics that you can use to make sure that everyone's perspective is heard.
Yeah,
because
they're feeling valued.
Exactly. And I genuinely think that we make better decisions when we have different demographics represented at the decision-making table, whether it's men and women, whether it's young people, old people, whether it's people from a Caucasian background, people from a different ethnic heritage. When they're all there making the decision together, we make better, stronger, more robust decisions than we would if we had only people who all wear matching blue shirts. And all were born within the same decade.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. And really, like, that should be like a snapshot of the church. And that is one of the church's superpowers, right?
Yes.
Like, in the sense that it should be representative of every socioeconomic level. It should be representative of every culture and every people group within those sort of things. And so the leadership then kind of needs to be representative to as much as possible, obviously without sort of falsely or manufacturing like representation, but you're wanting to encourage that diversity as much as possible.
Definitely. And just another thing we were talking about, I guess a tip for a young person sitting on a church board,
Yeah.
Something that's really important is that your message matches your mission.
Okay. So what
So
do you mean by that?
what I mean by that is um, if you're living in such a way,
Yeah.
a certain type of way,
Yeah.
and then you turn up at a church board meeting and try to add your 2 cents and be a person of influence,
Okay.
you won't be taken seriously unless your lifestyle and who you are as a person matches, the good things you're talking about in a meeting context.
Yeah.
So what I'm touching on there is who you are online. Make people see that stuff. It's as simple
Yeah.
as that.
Well,
Make sure it aligns.
I guess what you're talking about is integrity, right?
Definitely.
It is really is, and in terms of like leadership, integrity is a key part of that. And so it's, you can only lie for so long.
Yeah.
And you can only fake it for so long before
True.
the cracks start to appear. And I think you probably, if you're in that environment and like you think people don't know, people know, right? Like, and they might not know specifics, but like as someone that has like, one of my spiritual gifts would be discernment. Like people know, like they can tell. And like, especially if you've been like around the block, so to speak, like you've had life experiences and different things, like you can tell. But yeah, integrity, I think, and particularly for leading up, like so leading people that are higher up than you and leading people that are have more experience or age or whatever it is. If you don't have integrity, they're not going to take you seriously at all. And they might not have integrity, right? Like they could be hypocrites as well. But they're still the gatekeepers. And so if you want them to take you seriously, you have to have integrity.
That's true. Yeah.
No, that's a very good point. I want to ask a few, well, we should, before we get to those questions. So you said you've left, after a few years, you moved out of your role in the conference from General Sec to back to doing law again. What are you doing?
Yeah, good question. I'm glad you asked that. Not that I feel like I have to justify it, but I do want to tell the story because I think it's a good story. And that is, in the General Secretary role, part of the work involved caring for children. So child protection was one of them. Working with AdSafe, who I hold in high regard. I'll say that publicly. I saw their work behind the scenes.
Well, and I think like as a church, like it's not necessarily something that we've always done well in the past, and that's like every organization, both secular and religious.
100%.
But for us as a church now, I think we're actually really leaders in child safety and that kind of thing from what I see around.
Definitely, I agree with that. So that was the context I was coming from. I actually really enjoyed that work at a conference level, again, because we come back to this concept of the least of these. Our children are vulnerable, and we're called as Christians to care for them and equip them with a correct and authentic understanding of who God is. And abuse interrupts or confuses their understanding of God and the fact that He is loving and He wants the best for us. So from that perspective, we need to do that stuff well. And so I've really enjoyed that work. And out of the blue, I was contacted by a law firm here in Perth, who said, "Hey, we've been advised that you're working in the child protection sphere and that you're also a lawyer. We'd like to offer you a job in, working in litigation in respect of historical sexual abuse claims." So what that means is that legislation recently changed in WA and in other states around Australia, whereby in the past, people who are survivors of abuse couldn't sue the institutions within which that abuse happened because limitation periods expired, often after 6 years. And if you're abused
6
when
years is not a very long period of time when you're talking about things
that's
that
right.
happen as a kid.
And we know that survivors on average don't speak out or tell anyone about what's happened to them for about 21 years after it's occurred. So as a result, legislation has changed after the Royal Commission, whereby those limitation periods have been lifted, and now survivors of abuse can sue institutions for failing in their duty of care to care for them, you know, by permitting, I guess, abuse to happen by employees or agents or people like ministers of religion or other volunteers, as the case may be. So I thought, oh my goodness, I love court work, I love litigation, and I'm really passionate about child protection issues. God, is this you opening the door to, again, a place where my interests and passions and skills can develop? So it was on that basis I accepted that job and left the conference role and started the new job in January this year.
Was it only this year?
Yeah.
COVID timelines has got me messed up.
What year is it? I don't know.
I don't know. I was thinking it was like the start of last year that you started. So it's only pretty fresh then.
It is, yeah.
That's cool. So let me ask you a question around, you sort of talked about like your faith in a school environment and that kind of thing. How do you go working as a Christian in a non-Christian environment, right? So like the law setting, it's not a Christian. You're not necessarily going to be surrounded by Christians. You're not necessarily going to be surrounded by people that have the same values as you, or whatever might be the case. How do you sort of stick to your values in that kind of environment?
I actually prefer it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Switching into church work, as I said, I'd never been to Adventist schools. I hadn't been in any of our institutions per se. And so, it was different for me because I've always had secular peers. And I really enjoy working with non-Christian people because the way they look at life, the issues they come up against, it makes you challenge your own beliefs and question your own beliefs. And you want to be helpful to people and supportive of people. And in dealing with them, you can't just go and say, hey, the Bible says this and this will fix your problem. It's just not how it works. You have to build rapport. You have to have things in common. You have to be a normal human, make friends. And it's through that relationship that, the Spirit works and, hopefully you can have some kind of influence on their life.
Yeah. Influence, like it's something that you've brought up a couple of times. And if you had to define influence, what would you define influence as? Tough question. Even like if I was to, what one word would you say? Like if I say, what's influence? What's the word that comes to you?
Followers.
Yeah, that's good. Like that's a good response.
But I will say, I think influence can be good or bad.
Yeah, well, sure.
And influencers can either be people doing it for self-gain. Or they can be humble people of integrity who are seeking a greater good. And in seeking that good, other people see that and want to come alongside that and know more about that and perhaps follow in the same footsteps.
That like that, basically what you've just described is discipleship. Like if we put it in church terms, like, and I think that's really cool. Like I hadn't really thought about discipleship being influence before, but really it's that having those people that influence over someone where they grow in their relationship with God and that kind of thing. In your journey, and this could be anyone from being a kid, a teen, at work, working for the church. Who's the first person that comes to mind when I say the person that's had the most significant impact in regards to your faith walk?
Oh, I can't pick one.
Who was the first person that popped into your head though?
Oh, well, my parents for sure.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing where you grow up as a kid and then you become friends with your parents as an adult,
Yeah.
and you see a whole different side to them. And, you know, you see their struggles as well, and you see how they work through that as people of faith. And I've seen that, you know, kind of magnified in my parents the last couple of years. And yeah, it's a quiet faith. It's not a Leslie, you should do this, rah, 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 rah. It's seeing their example and seeing how they work through good times and bad times.
Cool.
And yeah, it means the world.
Yeah, for sure. And like, you know, I said this to Ray in the last episode, like what a blessing for you to grow up with parents that you can say that about.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's crazy. Outside of your parents, is there someone that jumps to mind? And it could be someone like recently that's been a mentor. It could be someone that was a mentor through uni, or who's someone that's influenced you for the positive in your life?
Do you know what? I actually have different mentors in different realms of my life.
Sure.
So it's not a case of one.
You got like a professional one.
Yeah, totally.
But
So,
is there someone that sticks out in your mind that's been like a significant person? There's not one person that sticks out?
There's not one person, no. Okay. It's a collective, and that's a deliberate thing as well.
No, well, like it makes sense. I think it's a good thing because you're not going to find someone that's going to be able to mentor you in all fields of your life. So that's a good thing. What inspires you about Jesus? I know, like we've probably touched on it really, like with the least of these kind of things. But is there something in particular? Is there a story or something that you have that you always find going back to?
Yeah, totally. So I love that you called this the Emmaus Project, because that's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
The thing I love about that story is that, you know, when Jesus was walking that road with those, I think, two individuals, it just signifies the beauty of a life lived with Jesus. And what I mean by that is that Jesus was walking with them shoulder to shoulder, explaining who he was. And I think there's a lot to be said in that through our lives, I think that's how Jesus wants to be with us as well. And that's been my experience, that he reveals himself no matter what the road looks like. And it's a quiet, this is who I am. Remember, this is who I am. Don't be distracted by that. Let me remind you again, this is who I am, and this is the plan that I have for you. And it's a journeying together, shoulder to shoulder as friends.
Yeah.
I love that.
I'm sorry, just a sec. My dogs are barking. I'll be back. I'll cut this out.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but the boys are out with the neighbors, and the dogs freak out. Yeah, that's all good. I'll cut that bit.
Yeah, good.
So what we'll do, like I've just got sort of like a couple of those shorter questions.
Yeah.
So we'll ask like, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self? And if you could change one thing about church, what would you change? So that's a bigger, deeper one. Yeah, so that's really cool. Final two sort of questions. What one piece of advice do you wish you could have given yourself, given 20-year-old Leslie?
Yeah, good question. When I was 20, I was living in Japan,
Okay.
And, you know, I thought, oh, these Japanese language skills are going to make me, be so useful in my legal career. But I didn't learn any professional Japanese. All I learned was slang. So,
Fail.
yeah. So I'd say to myself, your language proficiency is neither here nor there. So have a good time, and yes, go snowboarding. That's great.
Don't stress about it too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd also say to myself, keep being faithful in the small things.
Okay.
Because it's in that faithfulness that God gives you new opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a really good lesson, because it's so easy to overlook. And last week I was talking with Ray about patience and having patience when you're young, that you sort of only want to worry about big things.
Yeah.
But, God, and it's just, I think, the natural order of things in some respects, that if you aren't looking after the little things, then you won't be ready when the big things come up.
So true.
Or whatever, however it works out. Yeah, good answer. If there was one thing you could change about the church, what would you change?
I would remind us that truth stands regardless of what we do. And that means that we shouldn't be fearful. We shouldn't be making ourselves more exclusive. We should be opening ourselves up, because truth stands on its own 2 feet. I would add to that by saying that, this concept of present truth is something that we believe in. And what it means is that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
God, that Jesus is still revealing things to us. So when we think we've arrived, we haven't.
Yeah.
There's still so many beautiful things to learn. And some of those beautiful things are outside of the confines and the comfort of our Adventist culture.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be afraid of that.
Yeah. I did a series on the Reformation a couple of years ago, because it was the 500 years.
Yeah.
I had this little catchphrase, and it was that the Reformation isn't a past event, fixed event in the past. It is the present journey of the people of God.
Yeah.
And we like to think, it happened, that thing happened there, and then we have, when we established our church and we did this, and that's sort of locked in, even though we have this foundational belief that God is revealing himself continually to us, and we're supposed to be growing in that revelation. That's very uncomfortable for humans because it's sort of that saying, well, no, we don't know everything, and we're waiting for God to, it's not until he finally reveals himself completely that we're going to know.
And that not knowing shouldn't make us uncomfortable. It should make us feel excited and look forward to the future.
Yeah, well, and definitely should be excited, but at the very least, I think it's becoming comfortable with the uncomfortableness of it, because and it's hard for us, I think, because we've put so much focus on, we call it the truth, but a probably better way of describing it is being right. And we have this real focus on almost needing to be right about something. And we sort of label it the truth because it sounds more holy. But, we sort of need to be confident in what we believe, but also walk the line of knowing that, well, God could reveal something to us.
Definitely. And sometimes he uses the most surprising vehicles for that.
Well, I think not sometimes, pretty much all the time. He uses the most surprising, the most unexpected vehicles, and that's all of Scripture, right? Is he uses the most unexpected people. Because that's God.
Definitely.
Yeah. Lesleigh, it's been awesome catching up with you. We need to chat more, not just on recording, but
true.
we'll catch up again soon, and hopefully we'll be able to get you to the East Coast sometime.
Thank you, mate. Come back to WA.
Well, we still have the house, so who knows? Maybe one day.
Good. All
We'll
right.
see what happens.
Nice
Thanks
to
again.
chat with you, Dan. Take care.
Yeah, thanks.
All
I'll catch you later.
All right.